Hey there, friends. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ellen Pitts, and today I'm speaking with Al Wasserman, my friend who has recently relocated from New York to the Raleigh, North Carolina area. Thanks for joining me today, Al.
Thanks for having me, Ellen.
So before we get started, I wanted to make a comment about Al's backdrop. I wasn't going to mention this later, but you see he's got all those knives in the back. He is actually a chef. I didn't want people to get scared by the knives. He's a chef. He's got a YouTube channel called Eat More Vegans, meaning eat more vegetarian animals like cows and things. And he does all kinds of cool videos about the different preparations of those foods. So I'll put a link in the comments to that. But today we're going to talk about his relocation from New York to North Carolina. So
Right.
Why don't we start with you telling me what part of New York you came from?
Hi. So we lived in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg neighborhood in Brooklyn, which was a beautiful area right along the river, close to Manhattan, but also the epicenter of the pandemic. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So at the beginning, Williamsburg was the zip code that had the highest concentration.
I remember.
In the United States, right, which was a little scary. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you moved from New York City, and do you want to talk about why you moved? Was it the pandemic that kind of pushed that, or were you thinking about it beforehand?
We've been thinking about it for a while. I think the pandemic and the rioting that was going on earlier this year were two big factors that were kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. But we've been talking about moving probably for a year or two. Our plan had been when our daughter was out of elementary school, she's in 4th grade now. When she was out of elementary school would be the ideal time because she was going to have to switch schools anyway.
Right.
But with the schools closed down and everything else changing, we decided to accelerate. And, you know, we looked at a couple of different areas. North Carolina was always very high on our list. We have friends here. I've done a lot of business here in the RTP area. Before launching the YouTube channel, I was a technology entrepreneur, and so a lot of my clients were down here in RTP. So I've got kind of a network of friends and people, and I know the area and had a feel for what it was going to be like. My wife had been down here a couple of times visiting friends, so it wasn't a surprise that we ended up in North Carolina. And, you know, then of course the choice was, do we go to Charlotte? Do we come to Raleigh, where we have the bigger network? We have friends in Charlotte. Right. We have friends in Greensboro, which is kind of partway in between.
Yeah.
And so we looked a lot at the different neighborhoods, the value for the money, the culture, what was going to be available. Right. And in the end, Raleigh just checked every box. The quality of the school system, you know, Wake County, we ended up in Morrisville. Right. And the Wake County school system and Parkside Elementary, where Leah, my daughter, ended up, were, you know, big factors. Right. We ended up choosing the neighborhood because it was zoned to Parkside.
Cool. Okay. So, so it was pretty much the school system that made you choose Raleigh over Charlotte and Greensboro?
The school system, I think the people, I think Raleigh is more cosmopolitan than Greensboro is. Right? And, you know, this is politically, my wife and I are both centrists, but different sides of the center line. And Raleigh is a nice purple area, right? And so, and that prediction turned out to be true. Like, we came from a neighborhood where people were militaristic and arguing and in your face about their political positions, to a place where I think everybody coexists here. And so, you know, there wasn't as much fighting. It wasn't as much uncomfortable, right? Everybody got along here, which is what you'd imagine would happen in a melting pot like New York. But in fact, it didn't. It didn't, because it was so heavily weighted to one side, and it didn't matter which side you were on. Like we also looked at some places in Texas, and wherever one side is so predominant, it seems to be the topic. Whereas when it's well blended, people play nice, I guess, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I'm not going to go into my own political stuff I could add to that, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on. It's nice to live in a place where there are other things that define the conversation other than politics.
I agree 100% with that. I will definitely say that.
Yeah.
What's your overall perception? Do you love it? Are there things that you thought you would like that you don't? Are there things that you're surprised that you like that you didn't expect?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let's start with what we like and didn't expect. I am really surprised by the quality of the local restaurants here. One of the things that we really loved about Brooklyn was that all of the restaurants were mom and pop restaurants. Like everything was little, you got to know the owners, the staff didn't turn over, everybody was there. And, that all ended with the pandemic, right? And the only businesses that have really been able to survive are the big box stores and the national chains and the small restaurants that thrive on delivery, but the high-end restaurants aren't, really appropriate for delivery. So a lot of that has just kind of gone away in Brooklyn, and we felt like we were going to miss that. We're big sushi people, and in the first couple weeks after coming here, we went to downtown Cary at the park, and there's a sushi restaurant right there in what used to be an old either home or hotel there along the park. And it was at least as good, if not better, than most of the sushi places that we went to in New York. Really super impressed. The pricing was similar to New York, so that I'll give them that. But most of the time, we're eating an amazing quality meal for probably half the price of what we had in New York, and I don't feel like we're sacrificing on quality. We're big believers in supporting local businesses, so we do try to go out at least once a week, if not more, and try a different place each time, right? And I don't know that we've succeeded. There's a couple of favorites that we keep going back to, but we haven't been let down.
What are your favorites, just out of curiosity?
So there's a Mexican restaurant right near us here. I don't know whether it's Morrisville or Cary. It's one side of the other border, called is it Mi Cancun or Mia Cancun? And they have a paradilla grill that is just amazing. They do obviously, I'm a meat guy, more vegans, right? So their grilled meat is amazing, but they also do grilled poblano peppers and just really cool flavor profiles. We've been back there 3 times and ordered from there once. And for considering we just moved here 5 months ago, that's a lot to eat in one restaurant as you're exploring the neighborhood. That's definitely one of the favorites. Sushi on the Park, obviously, not an every night occurrence given the price, but definitely a go-to for nice nights, especially date nights, where my wife and I can go, although Leah likes sushi as well.
Okay. I do want to comment. We got a bunch of people that have hopped on. I wanted to say that Al's knives in the back, you didn't hear this before, but his knives in the back are because he's a chef, and he has a YouTube channel where he does a lot of meat grilling and things like that. So, okay. So the next question I had for you is, what is the one thing that is the most different in your life now compared to New York City?
I'm going to give you 2 things, even though you asked for one, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So the one thing that's most different on the downside is accessibility. In Brooklyn, we would walk a block from our place, and we had a choice of 20 restaurants and 5 bodegas and anything that you really wanted. And we didn't even decide where we were going for dinner. We would walk down to Graham Avenue and see who had a line and who didn't have a line, and we'd go eat. And boy, I really miss that accessibility of, we're out of milk, run down the street to the bodega. I'm in the mood for steak and I don't have one in the house, I'm going to run down to the butcher shop. And so where we are in Morrisville, it's a 5 or 10 minute trip to go, and then you're going to a big grocery store. You're not going to a little bodega or a little butcher shop. And so I miss that, although I'm starting to find small fish markets and small butcher shops and places here that are a little harder to find. I think people prefer one trip to the Wegmans or to the Harris Teeter, and
you gotta drive between them all. Yeah, it's hard.
Right. So whereas I'm the guy who will go and pick the piece of meat that I want from the butcher, right? So I'd rather go to a butcher shop. Although the Wegmans meat department is pretty impressive. I got to hand them that. So that's, I think, the thing that we miss. The thing that was the biggest surprise on the positive is, and you probably take this for granted because you've been down here, right? But people come over and say hi. Like, they knock on the door, they got their masks on. The kids come over and ask if Leah can come out and play, and she does. And, you know, boy, you don't do that in Brooklyn, right? A knock on the door is a problem if you're not expecting somebody. Something's wrong when there's a knock on the door, right? And, you know, even play dates with the next door neighbors, you would text and say, hey, do your kids want to come over, or can Leah come over and play, or talk on the phone and make arrangements. The idea that a kid would just show up on the door and knock, and, you know, that, boy, it's so amazing. Leah has so much fun. She's made so many friends in the neighborhood. They're all really good at social distancing. So they wear their masks, they stay 6 feet apart. They'll take mask breaks where they'll go spread out and take their masks off so they can breathe and then get back together and play. You know, the group here in this neighborhood's a really diverse neighborhood, which is good. You know, she grew up with that in Brooklyn, and she's got, I don't know, half a dozen or so go-to friends that she'll go skateboarding with, or riding her scooter, or, you know, just go play. And it's awesome. And we've met some really amazing neighbors. A couple of them have actually been on the show. They, you know, the downside of having us move in is that the neighborhood always smells like smoke with the smoker going on. It smells like cherry wood or apple, and people hungry
for food too.
Yeah, it's not smoke in a bad way. It's that smoke when you drive by a barbecue joint. But the good news is that they all get to come and taste the stuff that I'm making, and so we've made some pretty cool friends here in the neighborhood as well.
Yeah, I think the diversity thing, I think people are often surprised by that here, because I think a lot of the online stuff, you know, this area has changed a lot in the last 5 years. And I think a lot of online stuff says, you know, it's not very diverse and that sort of thing. And, you know, as a realtor, I'm not allowed to tell people like which neighborhoods are diverse or not diverse or whatever, but there's a lot of different kinds of people that have moved here. And
Right.
I do think it is a little bit of a melting pot now, but.
Yeah, it definitely is. I don't know that the whole state is, but certainly Wake County is, right? And, you know, you and I talked when we were considering moving down here about neighborhoods, and all of the neighborhoods that we considered all had good diversity. When you look at we use the schools, right? Because the schools reports tell you
exactly, it tells you
the population of the kids, and so that gave us a good idea of how to make sure that we were in a good diverse neighborhood, and you know, we picked right, but we did, you know, none of the neighborhoods we looked at had a problem with diversity.
Yeah, no. So what do you think about North Carolina culture? We kind of covered this a little bit with the people knocking on the door, but culturally it's different. It's slower. So what do you think of that?
So I love it. My wife loves it, but is getting used to it. She actually grew up outside of Chicago, but out in an area called Rockford, Illinois, which is a pretty, you know, exurbs right out there. And but we've been in New York for 6 years, and she's become a New Yorker. So she gets frustrated that she turns her turn signal on and people will slow down to let her in. Like, no, go. You're not supposed to slow down. Now we're all blocking traffic while we're figuring this out, right?
It's polite,
you know, and I really don't think it's fake. Like, there's areas of the South where you just get the feeling that you're being shined on when people are being nice to you. I just think people aren't that uptight, and they like their neighbors. And, you know, maybe I'm being fooled. Maybe they're just better actors here. But
I agree with you. I've been here 20 years, and I think people are just really friendly. I wouldn't live any. For me, it was a little bit different because I came from Florida, and Florida is like, you know, every ex-New Yorker lives in Florida.
Right.
My whole family is ex-New Yorkers. So it's that kind of culture down there. And when I moved here, all of that stuff was, you don't look people in the eye when you're walking by them on this, you know, in the neighborhood, in the street. You don't say hello. You don't, you know, acknowledge people. But
Right.
here, people are really, really friendly, and it is genuine. You know, it's just part of, like, you treat people nicely. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
And I love it. It took me time to get used to as well, but I just really enjoy, just, I don't know. I just like it. I really
Yeah,
like
it's great. You know, we had a neighbor stop by a couple of weeks ago and knocked on the door because we had left our garage door open and it had been open overnight, and so they figured we must not have known.
Right.
And you know, of course, we feel super safe in this neighborhood, right? But the fact that somebody would stop and tell you, "Hey, by the way, you know, your garage door is open,"
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's pretty
That happens
cool.
all the time. That's not just not a one-off. That happens all the time. People will
Yeah,
just look out for each other. Um, so housing.
yeah.
Obviously, so are you willing to share like the difference in the type of house you had or the type of home?
Yeah, if it's okay, I won't get into specific numbers, but I'll talk orders of magnitude. So we had in Brooklyn a really nice place. Like by Brooklyn standards, we lived very well. We had a 2,600 roughly square foot split level that had a basement level that had the bedrooms, a main level that had living area, office, kitchen, etc., and then a loft where we had set up a little gym, and Leah, my daughter, had her office for school was up there, right?
Yeah.
And a nice little backyard, probably about a 1,200, 1,300 square foot backyard, which worked really well for grilling, especially with the grilling channel, right? The kitchen, the kitchen was smaller than my smallest bathroom here, right? So as a as a guy who has this collection of knives, it was a little hard, right? But you know, you make do. New York City, the assumption is that people are going to be out every night. They're not going to be eating at home. They're not going to be spending their family time at home. They're going to be out, and so home is a place to sleep. And so even though we had a nice big place, some of the designs were, anticipated that home weren't going to be homebodies, right?
Right.
That, by the way, made the place very popular when we left, right? Because finding a place in Brooklyn that had a backyard and that much open air space and whatnot, that made it easy to move. So down here, I gave the realtor that we ended up working with a list of criteria of what would be ideal, and it was a pretty extensive list, and including, I wanted an area that I could turn into a kitchen studio. This isn't actually the kitchen I cook for in my family. This is the kitchen for the show. And so he came back and said, Al, that's a pretty long list, and there's not a lot of properties like that. Like, you're going to be paying a lot of money. And so I told him what the numbers were on our place in Brooklyn, and he said, okay, yeah, no, never mind. We can find that. And so we ended up in Morrisville, which we're not in the city, right? So part of this is moving out a little bit from the city, right, to the burbs, but we're in a 7,300 square foot house on about half an acre of land. And we're paying, this has cost about a third of what the Brooklyn place cost.
Wow. That's just,
so
what are you doing?
The space for a third of the money.
Yeah.
And this is an amazing house, right? I mean, it's just the three of us. The basement is a man cave and the studio. The backyard, the downstairs area is the grills where I film. Then there's a huge deck upstairs that I cook on and have grills up there for the this personal stuff. We've got a hill in the backyard that we put a slide on, a water slide. So in the summer, the kids can play on the water. So you couldn't do any of that stuff in Brooklyn, right? And like I said, a third of the price. So, I wouldn't have spent more if I could have, because we got so much with this house that any more would be too much. This is kind of too much, but it's, right. You know what, in a time like this where we spend more time in the house,
yeah.
You know what, having a place that's big enough that we can get lost and have to use the intercom or the Amazon devices to communicate with each other, boy, that's refreshing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, at this stage in life in America. Okay, so you haven't been here for a full year, so weather's not going to really be. We can't have a full conversation, but you can talk about the heat a little bit. When did you get here? What month?
Yeah, we got here July 15th. when it was 712 degrees and 140% humidity. Yeah, we've experienced the extreme on the hot side, and I'll tell you that our electric bill the first month was shocking, right?
Yeah.
Like, didn't make up the difference in housing costs, but it certainly put a big dent in the difference in housing costs.
Yeah.
And the mosquitoes were bad, right? Worse than New York, and we've discovered fire ants the hard way, which we weren't thrilled with. So some of the summer stuff here was a little harsh, but for the most part, we stayed inside. We got a couple of fans that we could put on the patio so that if we wanted to hang out on the patio, we could create a breeze more in the evening than during the day. Like, we didn't want to be out in the 100-degree days unless we were going across the street to the pool. We have a neighborhood pool, which is another big nice thing about here that we didn't have in Brooklyn. But by mid-September, things started to settle down, and by early November, it got really comfortable. And I think we're gonna miss not having snow this year. I know that's a rarity here in North Carolina, but there's something nice about having temperate weather. I'm still filming outside at night now, right? Where there's a point where you can't do that in New York.
I will say that snow, we're kind of like right at a cutoff where there's a line where you don't get a lot of snow, like in Wake County, but Durham often will, and like Chapel Hill and Hillsborough. So there are places you could probably go for snow that when we won't get any, and they will just a little bit north. It's just a little bit different in the climate for some reason.
Oh, good. Well, we'll have to go up there. We were planning on heading up into the mountains during school break in January, and heading up there so we could experience some snow. Maybe we won't have to go that far. Maybe we'll go anyway, right?
So let's talk traffic. So obviously in New York, you're walking most places.
Right.
So, and even just transportation in general, like subways, and we have no public transportation here. How does all of that impact your life, and how is it different? It's obviously significantly different.
It's radically different, right? And not that we were using public transportation during since March, right? But just for safety reasons. But before then, if you go into the city, it's faster to take the subway than it is to drive in or take a taxi or Uber. It's radically different here. Like, I miss being able to jump on the subway and in 8 minutes be in the city in the middle of it all in Manhattan, right? That doesn't exist today. Like, Manhattan, New York City is not what it was, but it'll be back in a few years, right? And I anticipate at that point we'd miss it. We're not moving back. I mean, we love it here. We've committed to stay here at least until Leah goes to college, and based on how the first 5 months have gone, it could be forever.
Yeah.
But the transportation is radically different. Traffic, we haven't seen traffic, like, other than an accident on the highway or something like that. There's not, there are things that other people might consider to be traffic, but if you've lived in New York City and you've taken an hour and a half to go a 3/4 of a mile through the Midtown Tunnel, then there's nothing. What's that?
I can't even imagine that. I would be so panicky and anxious doing that. That would drive me insane.
Yeah, it's traffic is not one of the features of New York. It's one of the things you put up with in New York. I haven't had that problem here. Now, I'm not commuting in and out of the city, so I don't know whether there's more of a pattern here, but it's not, you're not going to spend 2 hours commuting.
No. Sometimes in the heaviest traffic, you'll sit through a second light cycle.
Okay.
That's traffic. So viewers, if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'm sure Al will answer any questions that you have. Let me see, what other questions do I have for you here? Crime. This is the last. Well, schools and crime. We're going to talk about schools and crime. Let's talk about crime first. Have you experienced any crime since you've been here, and how do you think that feels compared to New York?
So we haven't experienced any crime. We had an interesting scare in the first couple weeks that we were here. We did a date night. We actually, Leah's old nanny from when she was growing up lives here in town. And so
Nice.
she came over to babysit, and we went out for a date night. And the house was so big that there's so much noises that nobody's used to and whatever, that the girls got freaked out and thought somebody was in the house. And so we got to experience what Morrisville Police Department was as we Ubered back from the city, and took us like a half hour to get here, and saw, you know, the police surrounding the house, and talked to the police sergeant on the way down. And it was quite an ordeal. You know, he said to me on the phone, look, there's nobody in your house. Like, we can't see every place in the house yet until you get here and let us in. But this is Morrisville. There's nobody in your house.
Right.
Your daughters are fine.
Yes.
And so they, you know, they of course cleared the house when we got here, and then, you know, talked to us about what had happened and what the noises might have come from. And we figure it was probably one of the dogs getting into something they weren't supposed to get into. That freaked out the girls. But that's been our only real issue. And I got to tell you, the police officers that were here, they felt like neighbors that were there. And by the way, the neighbors all came over to make sure everything was okay, including the next day, and like, which was pretty special. But, you know, I had friends in New York that were New York City police officers, but they were friends first, and then you know, that's what they do for a living. I could not imagine, you know, 20 New York police officers responding to a home invasion and acting in a manner that the Morrisville Police Department did. Big hats off to them. But yeah, we feel totally safe here. We got an alarm system, mostly to make Leah and her sitter Grayson feel more safe when they're here. And it's nice to have the Ring doorbell so I can see who's out there. But you know, my proximity detector in the backyard goes off almost every night. We have 2 rabbits that like to torment the motion detector, and I don't turn it off because I like watching them. One of these days, I'm going to leave a grill open with some bait on it. We'll see.
We had a similar experience with police here, and I've had some CDs ripped off out of my car in the 20 years I've lived here. Has been my experience with crime. But one time my kids were home alone, and I was out shopping, and one of them called me and said, "Mom, there's a guy in the backyard." And I was like, or what? And it ended up being the gas man checking the gas meter. But I did call the police, and they came over. It was the same kind of thing. They were just lovely and so friendly. And the police here are always wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm impressed.
Yeah. So, okay. Last topic of conversation, schools. What do you think of Leah's school? Is she back in person now?
Yeah. So they're doing a rotation now where she's in for a week and out for 2 weeks. Right now she's in school, or I'd have her come over and say hi. And then coming back after the break, they'll be back in school full time, knock on wood. Hopefully nothing changes for that. She's in a year-round program here at Parkside, which is new for us and absolutely amazing. Yeah. So for anybody who's watching that hasn't seen this, it's 9 weeks on and 3 weeks off through the year, plus the standard holidays. So for Christmas, she's actually off for a month. So she'll be done with school next Tuesday, I think. And then she doesn't go back until January 25th. So the idea that we've got these nice long breaks that we can travel someplace and not have to worry about rushing home, that's not during peak travel when everybody's traveling at Easter or Christmas, is going to be amazing. And look, I can't say anything negative about her school. Her school is, this is the second year for this school. I can't speak for all the schools in Wake County. I looked at a couple, and I was okay with any of them. And then when I found Parkside, that became a huge thing. So it's a year old. The principal, Teresa Caswell, was recruited for this spot for this school. She's very progressive in teaching methods. They architected the building so that the kids had collaboration areas and shared spaces where, you know, they're not just stuck with their class, they're interacting with others. Oh, nice. A lot of natural light. But from an academic standpoint, you know, really really, really impressive. Leah was in a gifted and talented program in New York, and they have a similar program here that they call AIG, where it's not a full-time program like New York. It's a couple of days a week. They pull them out for English language arts or for math, advanced studying. But even the main curriculum is not far off from where the New York gifted and talented curriculum was. So Leah is challenged. She's confident in some things, and other things she feels like she's got the right challenges to learn things. The teachers are totally approachable here, which they were in New York as well. I mean, we've had some amazing teachers in New York, but really impressed with the team at Parkside. Like I would say, if you're thinking about a neighborhood where Parkside is an option versus a neighborhood where it's not, I would pay extra, knowing what I know now, to live in a neighborhood where this school is there. It's super impressive.
So I'll just explain kind of how that option works. When you have year-round schools, everybody has some options for, if you would prefer a year-round calendar, there's going to be some other, another school that's not your districted school, but it's a year-round option.
Right.
So, that would be, you could choose that instead of your base school. So it's a little bit different. Schools are a little bit different here, but all right. Well, if nobody has any questions, that's all we've got for today. Thanks, Al. Appreciate you coming on. I think this was really informative. We had lots of people viewing throughout the show, and
great,
really helpful, I think.
Well, thanks for having me on, and like everything that you do, Ellen.
Awesome. Well, take care, and we'll see y'all next time.
All right. Bye now.